Alright, I'm going to show you how to send MIDI messages from Ableton Live to processing and use these MIDI messages in processing to change the shape of something. We'll see now in a second what to do with it. Okay, so changing the visuals through the MIDI messages we receive from Ableton Live. So first of all, you need to download the RW MIDI library. You can find it at this address. The details are below. Library. This is the jar file. Also, you need the example file under the MIDI receive example MIDI receive folder and the MIDI receive.pd, which is the processing sketch. Once you have them, you will install the RW MIDI jar into this folder on your sketchbook location for processing. Under libraries, you create a folder called RW MIDI. You create also a folder called library within the RW MIDI folder, and in library you place the jar file. Now we open the example, the processing sketch. Here it is, and this sketch basically gives you an idea of how to set processing to receive MIDI messages into the sketch. So this sketch is basically setting a port, and this is the code that deals with that part. We set a constructor and we retrieve a list of devices that processing can see. Once we get the list through this line of code, we can set what port to listen to through this number. So if I run the sketch, this is the if I run the sketch on the console, I will have the list of devices that are currently seen by processing, and the first one, and number 0, is the USB02 M audio, which is the MIDI keyboard I have, and the second one is the real-time sequencer Oracle Corporation. So I want to receive messages from the USB02 M audio. Here the number is set to 0, so we're good to go. If I press one key, there you go. I get node on messages sent over channel 0, which will be really channel 1. The pitch is 55 and the velocity is 104, followed by a second message with velocity 0, which stands for node off event. Good. Now once we have done that, we can close processing. Now the problem is that in Ableton Live, if we open the preferences under the MIDI tab, we don't have any port that is shared between Ableton Live and processing. So in here, the only list available is the USB02, which is again my MIDI keyboard, the physical hardware that I have here on my table, and that's not enough to communicate, to establish a communication directly from Ableton to processing. So in order to deal with that, we need to go onto the audio MIDI setup, which is under the application folder, utilities, audio MIDI setup. We open that and then window, show MIDI studio, and we need to double click on the IAC driver and just enabling this device by clicking here. Device is now online. This is a virtual MIDI port. We can, by default, you should have here bus number 1. I have created a second one by clicking the plus button. There you go. I rename it processing, so that I know, it's just for myself, you can call it whatever you want. I call it processing so that I know that I'm going to use that port to tell Ableton to send messages to processing, okay? And I close. Now we're good to go. Now what I need to do is, on my MIDI track here, create a bunch of notes, and I will check, make sure that I receive these notes into processing. I have my MIDI clip. Now the second thing I need to do is on MIDI 2, which would be the output port, for my MIDI interface. So I have to go and select the IC driver, processing, channel 1. Good. So now let's do something pretty sure we're going to send this data, we're going to receive this data into processing. So we're going to do something with it. So I create a new sketch, and what we're going to do now is, I don't know, we copy exactly the portion of code we are interested in to, which will be this one that sets the port, and then I get this one, the draw function, and the node on. Okay, we just deal with node on messages. There you go. And so let's say that we want to use the pitch value of all these MIDI nodes to change the radius of a circle that we're going to draw into processing. So in order to do that, we say ellipse. Ellipse takes 4 arguments. The first 2 are the x and y location of center location of the circle. So we're gonna say, just to make it easy, we center that. So width divided 2, comma, height divided 2, which is gonna basically take the size of our canvas divided by 2 and place it in the middle. Now the last 2 arguments, the third and the fourth, are the width and height of the ellipse. Now since we're going to create a circle, this will be the same number, and we want to get the pitch. Okay, so in order to do so, we'll create a global variable here, and I'll call it int my pitch. Okay, semicolon. And on my function that receive my function, void function, where I receive the node on messages, I'll say my pitch equal, and I just invoke the method that is present in the RW MIDI library. So my received node dot get pitch, open and close brackets, round brackets, and semicolon. Done. So now we just place that my pitch, comma, my pitch, just because these 2 values need to be the same. Close brackets, semicolon. Job done. Now we run the sketch, we save it. MIDI example, I call it test. Done. We run it. There's my sketch. I'll press play here, and it doesn't work because what I'm not doing correctly is that we need to change the port, right? 0 is listening to boss number 1, but I'm sending these messages through port processing, called processing, IC drive processing, which in here is number 2. So I stop the sketch and say number 2, save and run. And there you go. We have our circles. So one last thing we need to do is just refresh our canvas every time the draw function is called, and we do that by saying 102. There you go. By background. There you go. And here we have our circle with different radius according to the pitch. Now, of course, the radius here will be ranging from 0 to 127, which is the value of MIDI notes. Now we can add some sound. Now to add sound in Ableton, we cannot add a software instrument into the track, just because otherwise this menu here for the output of our MIDI messages will disappear. So what we do is just load the software instrument into a second MIDI track, and we ask Ableton to receive for that specific track MIDI messages from our original track. There you go. Now we have MIDI and visual synchronized.